Hello and welcome to Onslaught. I'm Felicity Ezewuike. A publication by Radio France suggests that French diplomacy in Africa weakened considerably in 2023 as former allies steered their foreign policies elsewhere in the wake of military coup and general political upheaval. Also, a new law making it harder for foreigners to immigrate to France, among other issues, has compounded matters. Observers say French interests in Africa faced monumental challenges in 2024, especially following the toppling of leaders in former French military strongholds in the restive Sahel region, for instance, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. An abrupt coup in Gabon, a key player in Central Africa, also brought an end to a lengthy partnership. It all seems for the wrong reasons, retrogression from hard-won democracy mostly. A review of the views in this publication makes up this first half of Onslaught. My guest is an African affairs analyst joining us from Cape Town, South Africa, Leonard Mbulle-Nziege. Thank you for joining us on Onslaught.
Thank you, Felicity, and Happy New Year to you. It's a pleasure
Happy
as always
New
to
Year.
be on.
Happy New Year. All right, let's begin with one of the views expressed by a senior fellow at the Timbuktu Institute in Senegal, that's Babakar Ndiaye. Is of the view that France is seeing a watershed moment in its ties with Africa. What are your thoughts reading this rather scolding review of Africa's deteriorating relationship with France?
I wholeheartedly agree with that assertion. As we've seen over the past few years, but most especially since the beginning of 2022, there has been a deterioration between France, the relationship between France and some of its former colonies in West and Central Africa. This has been exemplified by the toppling of pro-French or African leaders who are allied to France and some of these countries, as well as the request for French soldiers, which are stationed in countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, to depart from these countries. It has also been manifested by the fact that France has historically been the biggest political, economic, and security player in this region amongst this category of countries. However, you have other countries now, such as the United States, China, Russia, Turkey, amongst others, who are asserting themselves, and as a result, it fully manifests that France is somewhat losing a great degree of influence in a region which has historically been what we call their chasse gardée, or their hunting ground.
You seem to agree with most of the views expressed in this publication, but we'll try and take them bit by bit to get a better insight. But first, apologies to our viewer. We will be right back after this very short break to continue the conversation. We appreciate your patience. Let's continue the conversation with Leonard. Leonard, one of the things that was mentioned in that publication is the collapse of the G5 Sahel Alliance, the five-country alliance known as the G5, and its partnership with France. We know that the aim was to fight terrorism across the territory. Some parties have withdrawn from it, and its remaining members, I think Chad and Mauritania, suggest the total dissolution of the alliance, that it is very near. So I wanted to speak on that. Is that alliance still relevant? Mali has pulled out, and we know that others are on their way out. Is there a way maybe this can be revamped, or you think it's a good thing?
No, well, the G5 Sahel initiative was a French-supported security collective, which was, as you said, meant to fight violent extremists and jihadist groups in the Sahel. However, with the deterioration in relations between France and some of the core members, that is Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, their withdrawal has effectively put an end to the G5 Sahel, because they have also in turn created a new alliance, that is the Alliance of Sahel States, the Alliance des États Sahéliens, And what this is supposed to do is it's serving as a security consortium wherein the three members that had, former members that had left, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, are now going to pursue the same objectives which they were supposed to under the G5 Sahel, but rather as a triumvirate. And this is also going to be without the support of France and other Western countries. So in the security sense, it's more symbolically important because these three countries on their own, it's going to be difficult for them to pursue these objectives on their own. But then also, it is a further indication that security, which was one of the backbones of French involvement in West and Central Africa, is something which these former French colonies are turning away from in terms of just overall support from France.
Okay, I want to take on the liner on the screen, and that is understanding the anti-French sentiment that's growing in West Africa. I want to take your view on that, because some say all of the analysis that's contained in that publication has its roots tied to the anti-French sentiment.
Yes, it's a conflation of sentiments because many people believe that, and I come from a French-speaking country, Cameroon, that a lot of the bad governance, a lot of the poor leadership in these former French colonies is as a result of France's lingering involvement in those nations. I mean, compared to the British and the Portuguese, when the French left as colonizers in the 1960s, unlike those former colonizers, France stayed behind. They put in place new colonial frameworks, which they dubbed cooperation. So, the citizens of these countries are angry that, you have the CFA franc, wherein you still have a lot of reserves of these countries based in France. You have, for example, France still has a lot of their soldiers based in these African countries. French foreign policy is directed significantly towards African countries, and a lot of the citizens and some of the leaders believe that they aren't fully independent, they aren't sovereign. So these are sentiments which have been brewing for decades upon decades. But then what you have now is that you've had a cocktail wherein there are new leaders, younger leaders who have not grown within the setup of colonial France, and they've also grown up with the understanding that the globalization allows these countries to pursue new partnerships. And moreover, French foreign policy and French leaders have not been willing to adhere to these demands that France needs to modernize, to evolve in the way that they interact with these African countries. And as a result, we've seen a headway wherein you had the dramatic dismissal of French troops in a matter which caught France as well as a lot of observers off guard.
All right, let's go back to the publication now. I'm going to read out a quote for you. In the Central African Republic, where France's peacekeeping mission between 2013 and 2022 is also seen as a failure, Russian forces have replaced French soldiers. U.S. security firms are also vying for a way in. End of quote. Now, when I read this part, my thought is, are coups being encouraged in Africa? I mean, from where I'm sitting, it does read like a scramble is continuing, doesn't it?
We're definitely in a period where we're experiencing coup contagion. We're going back to the battle days of the 1960s to the 1980s. You're as Nigerian, you understand that this was reality because Nigeria is one of the countries which experienced this trend during that time period. And now you're seeing Francophone African countries because a lot of the citizens of these countries believe that the governance systems do not allow them to play a part in terms of decision making, and they also believe that the leaders are not doing their utmost to improve their livelihoods. And this is seen in the routine rigging of elections. This is seen in long-standing family dynasties, the emergence of dominant parties, and in many instances these are supported by foreign countries such as France. And I wouldn't say that they're being encouraged, but the problem is that in the 1990s and early 2000s, these cohort of African countries embraced the third wave of democratization. They said no to single party as well as single man rule. But then what they've come to realize is that the current dispensation of democracy is not providing the fruits as well as the benefits that they had expected. And as a result, they say, we want these military people to come in for a short while to rectify all the shortcomings that the civilian administrations haven't been able to. And then when they've been able to rectify that, they put in place the foundation for now a return to civilian rule.
You talked about the pulling out of French troops from places like Mali. We also know they've gone off from Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Gabon, Djibouti, and Chad. Burkina Faso is also included. Has France, my question actually is, has France lost its diplomatic and military place, so to speak, in the Shire for sure? Because that's a certainty that's been expressed not only in this publication by other political observers.
Well, as I said, it's been very, very dramatic, and it's occurred in a very, very short space of time, wherein you've seen this deterioration of relations between France and the aforementioned countries. That is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And this has been exemplified by the dismissal of troops from these countries. And in Niger, for example, they have closed a diplomatic mission. France has significantly curtailed its diplomatic personnel in Burkina Faso as well as Mali. In the immediate, that is in the near term, yes, France has more or less closed its doors in terms of engaging with these countries. But then I believe that in the medium to long term, there is going to be a reestablishment of ties with France between these countries. However, France is going through a crossroads as well on the domestic front. As you've seen, there's the new immigration laws. France is dealing with, a clash of cultures. There's a rise of the far right. And as a result, France also needs to do some internal soul searching with respect to their foreign policy. France has been very, how can I put the word? They've remained very cemented in the 1960 logic with respect to how they're dealing with Africa, because now they're very territorial with respect to how they have engaged with especially the former colonies, because this is where France derives its status as an international power. Western Central Africa is the only region in the world where France can say to themselves that we are the leading power. And as a result, France has been very, very, they've been very static with respect to, making improvements with respect to reforms. So in order for France in the medium to long term to reestablish itself as being influential in the diplomatic, economic, and security senses in this part of the continent, they will need to reform their foreign policy.
All right, I'll come back to touch on the overtures you mentioned and the reforms that are needed, but I want to pick on the immigration law that you mentioned briefly so you can expand on it. There's been a lot of concern about how this is affecting foreigners, making it harder for them to immigrate to France. It's imposing rather prohibitive charges for students as well, for visas. And some people are saying it's a terrible message for African students who it suggested could contribute to the future relations between France and the continent. How is this further eroding relations? And is there a possibility of a review of this law? It's also causing domestic upheavals, as you mentioned.
Yes, it's causing causing significant consternation because it's not necessarily the immigration policy, but then at the bilateral level, students, artists, and other segments of the society who are desirous to pursue opportunities in France have been denied visas. From what I've read, there has been some sort of a de-escalation, and the requests are being assessed on a case-by-case basis. But then, the access to education, access to French cultural establishments, that is a form of soft power. That is a way that France would have been desirous in order to maintain these relations, because at the level of the elite, right now, as we said, there's been a severe deterioration. One could even say there's been a complete cutoff. But then, as like I said, I come from a former French colony, a French-speaking country. There is still an adherence to, a desire to access French education, a desire to pursue careers in France. And France, taking those dramatic steps by reducing visa access, will harden these people's indignation towards France. And if another country, say, China, Russia, or the United States, or some other African country like South Africa or like where I'm based, decides to jump upon that, that in the long term could also have detrimental effects because, as you noted, it's these individuals who help to build these ties. It's these individuals who help to build the influence of countries like France in their home country. So it is a very, very detrimental move that has been taken, and I think it's misplaced. It's taking, it's misplaced action because you're attacking the individuals who aren't necessarily at the core of whatever consternation which France has with these leaders of these countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.
Do you think maybe the controversy that's been stirred by not just the law now and other issues related to what you just said will necessitate a change or will push a change, or the likelihood of that happening is very slim?
No, there is a likelihood. I mean, as I said, these are immediate measures. I think these were very knee-jerk measures. The French were very hurt. It caught them off guard. It hurt their pride because one of the issues with respect to France's involvement in West Central Africa and how it has differed significantly from, say, the Portuguese and the British involvement in their foreign colonies is that it's a sense of grandeur. France's influence has been a source of pride. As I said, this is where France derives its status as an international power. But then it hurt them, so they needed to, show that, okay, you know what, we can also do a tick for tack move. But then in the medium to long run, continuing with this policy action is going to be very detrimental. It's going to be counterproductive because, as I said, these are French-speaking countries. And if people want to pursue better, higher quality education, if you're an artist and you want to, find yourself with a better audience, or you want to improve your talents, you're going to go to the country which is the originator of this language and that culture. But then France pursuing, the current decisions whereby they're restricting visas, whereby they're taking a hardline stance towards Africans in these countries rather than the elites, I think it's misplaced. And in the long run, as well as in the medium term, it is something that's going to need to be reformulated, as well as France's whole foreign policy with respect to this cohort of countries.
Last year, we saw a visit from French president to a few African countries. Would you say this is part of some of the overtures to try and, reestablish their sort of authority in the continent, trying to displace China and the US that are trying to, creep in? Or are there more specific reforms that has been carried out that you think maybe is showing a commitment to ensuring that they don't lose their grip on Africa and that the relationship, the partnership continues?
Yes, in 2022 and 2023, President Macron embarked on a tour of Central African countries, that is the countries that make up the economic community of Central African countries. And this included Cameroon, Gabon, and Congo-Brazzaville. Now, during President Macron's first term of office, he more or less shunned these leaders. He criticized them, not directly, but then in his statements, he criticized their long-standing rule, the lack of development that they pursued in their countries, the allegations of corruption. But then Macron decided to take a realpolitik approach and engage with them, because if you look at these countries, they've historically been, some of the backbones of French policy in Africa. But then now you come to see that China, not to a lesser extent the United States, but then Turkey, Singapore, and other Asian countries, even Nigeria, have asserted themselves as, primary economic players in these countries. So Macron's visits in 2022 and 2023 to these countries was more out of realpolitik. He understood that even if he isn't aligned in principle with how these leaders are running these countries, in a diplomatic sense, and above all, with respect to geopolitical considerations, France needs to continue to engage with them so that they don't turn to these other countries which have consolidated their foothold in what has been traditionally French spheres of influence. And in terms of just overall reforms, I wouldn't say that France has definitely understood that they can't pursue relations in the same manner. And as a result, they've spoken more to engaging with the youth, investing in technology, as well as, promoting, initiatives pertaining to climate change. But then in the grand scheme of things, there are still deeper changes that President Macron and his administration need to undertake with respect to how French foreign policy is carried out, particularly with respect to Francophone Africa.
All right, in 1 minute, if you can, as quickly as possible, what would be an ideal or a better relationship between Africa and France? What would it look like, and what should be the measuring stakes? Quickly.
President Macron and the French foreign policy decision makers need to listen to what are the concerns of Africans. If Africans say that France is acting in a paternalist and condescending manner, they must adhere to that, because I have spoken to French diplomats and French decision makers, and they think that they're doing a favor by, having these deep-seated relations with France. France also needs to look to how they can build relations with non-French speaking countries, for example, Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, and the rest, so that, they can mitigate the losses that they've had in the Sahel region, as well as, the growing anti-French sentiment across Central Africa and their other former colonies as well.
Leonard, thank you very much. You do illuminate questions and issues with some clarity, and we appreciate that you do that for us here at News Central.
Thank you, Felicity. It's always a pleasure being at News Central, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day, too.
We definitely will. Thanks. Right, up next, after the break, we'll be looking at elections in 2024 across Africa. There are about 18 of them expected. Will they hold? Will democracy grow? Stay with us. 2024 is set to be a big year for several of Africa's heavyweights. A third of the continent will be choosing leaders. 18 elections are expected, including Mali, Chad, and Burkina Faso. The three countries are specifically mentioned because, sadly, elections can only occur if the military junta keep their word. Political watchers also say elections in South Africa, Senegal, and Ghana could reshape many of the continent's long-standing democracies. Concerns are, however, high for Rwanda and Tunisia over fears that authoritarian rule will be further entrenched and democracy deferred. But what are the issues? Are there dynamics or emerging ones that still could disrupt the very worrying predictions? Will 2024 be the year Africa make bold moves to restore true democracy? My guest for this conversation is Dr. Omololu Fagbadebo, political analyst, Ondo State. Thank you very much for speaking with us, and a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you, Felicity. Yeah.
Let's start with your view of democracy in Africa in the year 2023. How did we fare, or did we succeed in moving further backwards?
Well, Africa is recording a measure of some progress in terms of democracy, in terms of election, like the case we had in Kenya. But largely, there are others that are still lagging behind, and there are, going by various domestic crises that we are having, there are possibilities of fears that there could be a recession, especially in the established democracy in Africa, for instance, South Africa and Ghana. For some African countries with entrenched dictatorship, like Tunisia, Rwanda, nothing much is expected. That's really nothing much is expected, yeah.
We'll definitely want you to expatiate a little on the situation in Tunisia a little later on the program. But first, let's look at a worrying trend, really, across Africa, where leaders seek to change their nation's constitution to consolidate power or run for life. This has, as you're aware, triggered new instability and coup that we witnessed in 20 2023. I want you to speak generally on this subject for a little bit, because it seems that's where I came from when I asked, are we moving backwards with democracy or we're making a headway? So I just want you to speak on that.
Thank you so much about that. For a long time now, we discovered that in Africa, we have leaders with entrenched interests, and because of their lust for power, seeking to stay in power forever. And that has been a culture, a political culture in Africa. And we've had that several times in different countries in Africa. We've seen that. In Nigeria, General Obasanjo, was trying to toy with the idea of a third term, whereby they are changing the constitution to extend the term limits. And that has led to crisis. And it is as a result of one, greed, and as a result of the lust for power, not because of the love for the country. And that is what dictates these major setbacks we have in Africa today, and especially the resurgence of military in Africa. The attempt by leaders to stay beyond the constitutional limit of term. That is what is leading to that crisis. And it has to be addressed in terms of leadership. The quality of leadership, the type of leadership, the leadership orientation, determines this a lot. And unfortunately, in Africa, we are so complacent. We believe when they give us, dollars, little coins to us, we support that kind of unconstitutional means. And it has been a problem, and it has been a real political challenge in Africa. And some are doing it directly, some are doing it indirectly. Some who want maybe people to come and ask them to come up or to extend it, that you are the best, you are the Messiah. There's no Messiah anywhere. The only thing is that you have, if it is 5-year term, if it is 4-year term, you have that term limit, stay there and then leave. But in Africa, African leaders want to die in power. And that is a bad culture.
Quite unfortunate. Quite unfortunate, really. And, there's an evolution of that. In Mali, for instance, the military leader and interim president, Assimi Goïta, is trying to position himself as a presidential candidate. We also know Chad and Guinea-Bissau are slated to hold election. For Mali, it was expected to be in February last year, but now it's in October. While the question whether these votes will even take place remain, many analysts share the view that if it does take place, the outcome of these elections are predictable. Do you agree with this view, or do you think there are dynamics, I suggested in the opening, that could still emerge to change the narrative?
I doubt it much, especially in those countries where the military juntas are trying to organize elections. What they want to do is that they just want to transmute themselves to civilian leaders. And believe with me, they will stay in power more than even the necessary constitutional requirements. We are back, Africa is back into the era of Praetorianism, whereby we have military regime stay in power for a long time, leading to coup and counter coup. That's what is going to happen. We are in another cycle of military rule in Africa. I don't know how a military junta will want to organize an election and then allow civilians to come in. Especially in this newly, these countries where they just took over in Mali. So it is. I don't see them coming back, to stay in barracks. They want to transmute. What want to witness in those countries is transmission of power.
But isn't that, sorry to say, but isn't that a bit pessimistic, really? Some would say there must be some way that these military leaders, they themselves have promised that they will go back to the barracks. And we've known there are instances across Africa where military was in power and somehow still managed to, transfer power and lead to democracy. Isn't that a possibility for you in the case of Mali, for instance?
It is a possibility, but at the same time, we cannot guarantee it. Anything can happen along the line, and then they come back. It has happened before. We've heard all these kind of narratives in the past. We've heard the Ezewuike, we are going to be like a guardian army. we are going to be there for a few times, for a few months, and then we transfer power. But we've had it all over. And in Burkina Faso, we had it there. We've had it in Gambia. So it is not just something that one can say, okay, well, definitely, this is possible. No, we can't say it. It depends on the outcome of the election. Who is going to organize the election? How are they going to organize the election? They can even organize the election in a manner that it will say, okay, everybody, it will be obvious that, oh, use this guy, please continue with this, continue with your regime, because the election itself is faulty. You know, that is in the area where, in countries where the military are in power. Those one, I cannot say I want to guarantee that, okay, where they will transfer power to the civilian. I cannot say that, you know, categorically, that, okay, well, 100%, I'm sure, I'm guaranteed. You can't say that.
Indeed, nobody can. Nobody can, really. At the end of the day, the people seem to be at the mercy of these military leaders. But I mean, like my grandmother always say, at the heart of everything, we're still humans, and we can see reason when it becomes imperative and when the people wish it enough. Anyways, let's look at the elections. The first in the year, if I'm correct, 2024, is going to be on February 25, when Senegal holds its presidential election. President Macky Sall, last July, ruled out seeking a third term. And for a lot of persons, this was good news. But then you hear of the opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko, who is controversial, and the cases against him triggered very violent protests, and social media shut down. What, for you, are the issues that will determine the election outcome in Senegal?
Well, one can look at it from two ways. If the opposition leader is willing for a smooth running election, and they abide by the outcome, provided the environment is conducive, provided the process is transparent, then if they agree on, okay, well, if whatever that comes out of this transparent election will agree, then it means it will be a smooth transition. But if not, if the opposition is being caged and the rights of the people to express themselves are becoming more and more difficult, it means that if there is any flaw along the line, the people might react. And that could lead to a larger crisis in that country. So the best thing is for the electoral body to be ready for a transparent electoral process, and for the government not to do anything that will tamper with the freedom of expression of citizens. The moment these are out of it, and then the election is transparent, I don't see any reason where there could be any problem. But as we look at as African leaders, you know, trying to calculate everything to work out for the preferred candidate, and then if this work against the interests of citizens, there could be a backlash. And the backlash could bring Senegal back to a kind of democratic recession. And I think that's my view for that. On that. Yeah.
All right, let's jump to Rwanda. Their own election is in July. We know that President Paul Kagame amended the constitution in 2015 to make himself eligible to run for elections until 2034. Do you expect any surprises with this particular one?
No, I don't. I'm not. As far as Rwanda is concerned, my take is that Kagame will remain in power until when he says he doesn't want to rule again. There's nothing anybody can do about that for now. That's for me. There's nothing about. He has done everything to silence his opposition, hunt them around, and all the rest. But he will only leave when he wants to leave.
That's really.
That's my pessimistic view about Rwanda, because the man is there, and it's just he has converted Rwanda to his private empire, where he decides what to do at any point in time. He will only leave when he wants to leave. Nobody, except even if there's a civil disobedience, and I don't know who will organize civil disobedience against Kagame in Rwanda, because the moment he got to know them, he silenced them. So that is the problem.
Quite heartbreaking, really.
Yeah, I'm so pessimistic because people celebrate Kagame. To me, yes, it's doing well, but why must you remain in power at the expense of society? Silencing your opposition, hunting them around, send them out of the country. If you are not in support of Kagame, he sent you out of Rwanda.
I'll be looking at South Africa's upcoming elections. Although an exact date is yet to be determined, people are saying the election is definitely going to be a tight race. A tight race, since the end of apartheid is going to be the biggest. The governing ANC faces strong opposition, particularly from the Democratic Alliance, who believe that they could make a bigger dent than usual in the ruling party's number this year. So my question to you, Dr. Omololu, is, will the ANC lose its grip on power in 2024? There were endless controversies plaguing the current ANC government.
Thank you, Felicity. ANC is not likely going to lose the grip of power, but it may likely, as we've been witnessing in the previous elections. In the past 2 or 3 elections now, we discovered that ANC support and then its gain has been dwindling. And the biggest challenge in recent time, which to me may not be a bigger challenge, is the decision of the former President Jacob Zuma, not to vote for ANC, even though he still claims to be a member of the ANC. The greatest problem of the ANC is the intra-party crisis, leadership crisis. The political party is polarized, and it's not new. Every year, at every election year, we see people leaving ANC to form another political party. The present crisis was created by former President Jacob Zuma. The corruption pandemic in his regime, especially the state capture, led to a series of the loss of confidence in the ANC. But the ANC still remains the traditional political party in South Africa. The IFP in KwaZulu-Natal, the EFF of Julius Malema himself used to be the youth leader in ANC. He broke away, then is gaining support. But EFF does not have enough power, at least enough support, to win the national election. But it can, for the past 2 elections now, it's been gaining some upper hands. Then the Democratic Alliance, DA has a full grip of Eastern Cape, of Western Cape. That's Cape Town. That one is there. But it's also maybe contesting or competing with ANC in some other municipalities. In local government elections, we saw the last local government elections how ANC lost in major municipalities, and that is going to be a repeat in this year's election as well.
Okay.
So ANC may not lose power, but the only thing that it may not have that super ordinary majority that it used to have in South Africa. And the greatest problem is it's because of its intra-party crisis. Yeah.
Aside the intra-party crisis, there are other issues that people argue will, affect their chances heavily. Speculators talk about the continued freedom of the former president, Jacob Zuma, who, yes, his incarceration caused some protests, but he does have questions to answer, including those in his cabinet. The failure, as some have argued, of the current president to address that is a failing that could impact on the elections. There's also the Farmgate scandal, which he barely scratched out of in 2023. Do you think this could, yes, you say they will still win, but could this be the toppling year for them? based on some of these?
The issue of Zuma and farm gate scandal of Ramaphosa might not be the major problem. The major problem is the economic crisis, especially the power, the energy, where there's no power, where they are talking about load shedding all the time. The electricity problem in South Africa is becoming more and more uncomfortable for people, especially for the businessmen. And so because of that, that's affected the economy, and the people are feeling it. That could be a major problem. The issue of Jacob Zuma is an intra-party crisis. They knew that, well, it might be difficult for Ramaphosa to deal with Zuma because of its support in the party. Zuma had tried to make sure that his wife succeeded him, but he failed because Lamini could not win. And because of that, Zuma knew that he had a lot of problems. He has a lot of integrity problems in terms of corruption, in terms of the record of corruption during his tenure as the president. And in fact, the dwindling image, the dwindling fortunes of the ANC today is as a result of the leadership of Zuma. So that's a major problem within the party. But when it comes to the real economy, that is where a majority of South Africans are not happy with the ANC.
The president.
And then
all right.
They are not even happy with the way he's handling the issue of corruption in South Africa. That's the major problem.
All right, Doctor, I'm told we have just about a minute more, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds of that and merge two questions quickly. Okay. Observers say the increased economic reliance, I was hoping we'll have time for this, but we don't. Russia and China will have a heavy impact on democratic aspirations of many African nations. I want your thoughts quickly on that and the growing empowerment and participation of youths in shaping the political future of Africa in the coming year.
Yes, Africa, I don't know how to describe Africa in terms of some things. When you look at Russia, when you look at the influence of Russia, when you look at the influence of China in Africa, and you discover that now some African countries are jingling to become members of the BRICS. Yes, in some ways, but to some extent, I don't foresee a major breakthrough in that trend. Russia is having its own problem. Russia is looking for something to hold on to in Africa to show up its integrity or its relevance in the international system. It's having crisis. Africa is not going to benefit much from. It's not going to benefit from that. I can say that. It's nothing other than another way of coming back. And in terms of the youth, yes, we have the youth who are resilient, who have the strength. But what are they getting in terms of legacy from the departing leaders?
All right, Doctor.
Corruption.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Felicity. Looking forward to another.
Yes, I certainly look forward to another conversation with you. And to you, our viewer, we truly appreciate your kind company. Hopeful it was worth your while enough to join us next week. Until then, do stay safe.